Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today's webinar is Land Acquisition Planning. Our instructor today is Amy Wilson, founder and principal consultant of Seed Renewal LLC. Today, I will be your webinar facilitator. My name is Alyssa Atkins, and I am the Training and Development Coordinator for the Native Learning Center. A quick disclaimer before we get started. This webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. The materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws and treaties. The terms permit you to use the sites for your personal and non-commercial use only. You may print or save copies of the sites solely for your personal non-commercial use. You may not distribute, transfer, transmit, copy, upload, download, post, publish, display, perform, modify, or otherwise create derivative works from any of the materials without the Seminole Tribe's prior written consent. Okay, fun stuff. You can access today's presentation slide available for download as well as the rest of the webinar materials in the courses page. How to join a live webinar. If you go ahead and log in, if you click that green banner, it'll take you into today's webinar or any webinar in the future. Once you log in, please always select listen only to avoid any audio feedback during the webinar. If you wish to change the speaker you are hearing from the webinar audio from, you can click this phone icon. We'll bring up a list of your speaker and mic devices so you can select the one you prefer. And then also, if you click the shared notes to access important links to send a message into the webinar open chat is all the way at the bottom. You can send a message in the chat. You can put any questions you like and Amy will monitor them. And I will also let her know when you ask a question. As we get started, let's introduce ourselves in the chat. Please take a moment and send into the chat your name, where you're joining from, your work or role in Indian country, and your tribal affiliation. A final note, please know that you can find all courses material for Amy's webinar and her previous webinars under your courses section. If you go there, you will find all your materials for the webinar. If you have a hard time finding any handouts, please feel free to email us and we will be more than happy to help you locate them and send them to you. Just please keep in mind, do not click anywhere on this red section or it will take you out of the webinar. If you get kicked out of the webinar, no worries. Log back on and click that green banner and you'll be taken right back to where you are now. It is now with a great pleasure that I hand it off to Amy.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. Let's see. So let's get started. It looks like a lot of people have joined. I appreciate you. And if you have any questions, please feel free to stop me. So let's see. Okay. My name is Amy Wilson, and by the way, thank you, NAHASDA, for the introduction. I appreciate that. I've worked with the Native Learning Center for a few years now and always feel really humbled and appreciative of their interest in having me back. So, oh, I'm sorry, I'm trying to get my computer right. I have about a little over 15 years of experience in land use planning, economic development, energy, natural resource planning. I've worked in Indian country for over 10 years. And I've been, prior to that, I worked as a city planner. I interned with the State Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, interned with the national planning firms. So I have a lot of experience in planning and land acquisition. I've done several land acquisition plans. So today we want to go through the learning objectives sorry, I'm old and have to have reading glasses. But the learning objectives today include to understand the differences between land acquisition, land assembly, and land aggregation, to recognize key features of land acquisition plans, and to identify how land acquisitions can be used to achieve land acquisition goals. So first, just, what is a land acquisition plan? This planning document refers to a document that has, policy that guides land acquisition, meaning the purchase or exception of land donations, fee property to meet the tribe's goals, whatever those land acquisition goals may be. This can be used for on-reservation fee lands, and it can be used for off-reservation fee lands. This planning process is typically initiated, by the tribal council, by a housing authority, an economic development board, and it can be led by a variety of stakeholders, either, a tribal commission, like your land commission, planning committee, a planning department, office of economic policy, or even, the tribal council may decide to form a task force for the specific purpose of developing this plan. I worked with, economic development and housing. And then this process can be, or the plan can be developed, and the process can be led either by, tribal personnel or by a consultant, or both. I know my process is very hands-on, and I work really closely with my clients. It's more like a team environment rather than like a client based project where we're really working together. And I think that those projects are the ones that are really successful, because you need both, and you both bring different expertise and experience to the table, and it shows in the outcome of those plans. And I can't see you all, so if you have a question and I don't see it, I'm not overlooking it. Maybe EWONAP, or if you can just kind of like ask your question, because I don't want to overlook you if you do have a question in the chat, because I can't see it. Just to let you know. Yeah,
I'll let you know, Amy, if anyone has any questions.
Perfect, thank you. So why is land acquisition important? It's important because it provides a strategic approach to help you to identify lands for acquiring and assembling those parcels and those properties, and to minimize ad hoc decision making and those related risks, right? If you're just kind of like making decisions by the seat of your pants, you're really not doing your due diligence. You're not, you don't have any like long-term strategy in terms of how those lands are really going to meet your needs. And at the end of the day, they may be more of a risk or a liability than an asset. And that's not what you want. Land acquisition planning helps you to mitigate that, to kind of sit down as a tribe, as a community, as an organization, to really, kind of hash out those goals and decide, what your goals for these lands are, and really to assess whether you have the capital needed to acquire and maintain those lands to the extent that they need to be taken care of. It helps to optimize acquisition and development costs, helps to ensure that future acquisition will advance tribal goals by setting a process for considering land goals and community needs and market conditions. And I think, by optimizing land costs, you want to make sure that if you're, acquiring lands for the purpose of development, do they have proper access? Do they have, are they close to market? Like, really taking time to evaluate all of those conditions and opportunities that are involved in the different jurisdictional issues. These plans help you to streamline decision making, and they also increase competitiveness when making offers and negotiating with sellers for both on-market and off-market properties. If you have a land acquisition plan in place that outlines, what lands we're looking at, what's the criteria, who's responsible for what, it allows you to be more competitive in a marketplace that demands, you know, a quick response, or, you know, it requires you to put down an offer and be ready to make that offer and to follow through on that, you know, with those on-market properties. You can't be competitive if you're like, find property and you have to go to council and you have to get this approval and you have to like do all this stuff. By then, you know, the opportunity is gone. So if you have everything kind of in place, it helps you to streamline those decisions. And then, yeah, and then setting procedures for evaluating and accepting land donations. And I think that's also, you know, a big important aspect of this is, again, doing your due diligence. You know, is this property really aligned with our goals? Is it what we want? Does it come with any liability? Like, you know, really evaluating that land. The benefits associated with land acquisition are kind of all over the board. They can include earning a passive income while waiting for, you know, more significant development to occur. So if you're, you know, if you acquire lands that are more in a rural area, but you know that, you know, this area is going to be, if your goal is economic development, you know, if you know in the future that economic development's going to be happening in that area, but it's going to be some time, and maybe there's, you know, a house on it, you can use it for a tribal member, you know, rent solar panels, you know, whatever, to have that passive income in the meantime. And again, I'm talking about lands for acquisition for either, you know, economic development or natural resources, not, you know, cultural. Obviously, those are, you know, have innate or inherent benefits that are far beyond any, you know, economic benefit. These lands can be also used if they're kept out of trust. You know, if you decide to take them into trust in the future, but in the meantime, if they're still in fee, you can use those lands to leverage to purchase additional lands. Those lands can also, they have value appreciation, right? So you're buying it for the equity, the value of that land as it appreciates in the future. You know, these lands can definitely be used to meet multiple needs, both commercial, you know, residential and industrial development based on how you want to see that happen. Another benefit is this enhancing contiguity and jurisdictional authority. If you have contiguity, you know, that's obviously expanding your authority, your sovereignty over lands in and around your reservation, your jurisdiction, reclaiming those lands, right? In a lot of instances. And there's a lot of obvious clear benefits that go with that, whether you decide to go through the land trust process or not, whether you keep them in fee. And then again, you know, that potential for fee to trust transfer, and then promoting that cultural connectedness, you know, being, again, like reclaiming those lands that should have never been taken in the first place. So, you know, what is the difference between land acquisition, land assemblage, and land aggregation? You know, there's several different, I guess, definitions or ways you can look at it, but for the purposes of this webinar and for how I view it when I do land acquisition planning, land acquisition refers to this process for acquiring land for real estate or cultural purposes. So and that includes for natural resource and preservation purposes. Land aggregation, meaning, you know, you're combining lands, combining two or more parcels to create a bigger parcel, or for contiguity. And then land assemblage refers to it's a land acquisition tactic or strategy aimed for acquiring contiguous or adjacent parcels, meaning that are near but not touching, for the purpose of combining them into a single parcel that's capable of supporting a more intensive or large-scale development, where aggregation will exponentially increase the current utility and worth. So that really gets at this concept of, when you're thinking about highest and best use, right? If you have a smaller parcel, you're going to be limited in terms of what you can do. Whereas if you aggregate those parcels and you strategically assemble them for the purpose of being able to, serve a higher utility or a higher use, which may require, in the future, if you keep it in as fee land, it would require probably a zone change. But if you were to be strategic about it and decide to assemble lands for a more significant or intense development, you can keep those lands, in fee, earn a passive income on them until that development occurs. And then when you're ready, after your lands are assembled and you're ready to invest in a more significant development, go through that fee to trust process. And then you won't have to deal with the zoning, but otherwise you would have to, rezone, which depending on the jurisdiction can be long or relatively easy, depending on the jurisdiction. So planning considerations, I'm going to go through all of these 12 points for, as you're developing your plan and kind of going through that planning process. Planning purpose, planning location, planning area, goals, overlapping authorities, related plans and applicable policies, ownership patterns, population and economic characteristics, priority areas, strategic framework, implementation, and land acquisition fund. These planning considerations can be, sections of your plan, and that's how I would recommend doing it. That you actually just use these as sections of your plan, and then kind of use this to guide your planning process. So planning purpose refers to, the purpose of the plan. Why are you doing it? Are you developing this land acquisition plan to grow your land base for social reasons, for cultural reasons, for economic benefits? It can and likely will be, all three of those, or even, something else that isn't noted in there. But you need to be clear on the outset of the process on what that purpose is, so that you can ensure that the plan meets your needs. And just a note, throughout the presentation, I'll have these little green boxes that say plan writing tip, and those just kind of refer to tips if you want to consider whenever you do develop your own plans. But the planning purpose section of the plan should clearly outline, the goal and the objective of the land acquisition and articulate the rationale behind the planning acquisition. So again, that determination of need. This section should also, explain or define the problem and your desired end results with that too. So planning location refers to the specific geographic area for the purpose of land acquisition planning. So you can do this different ways. There's no hard and fast rule. It's up to you. It's your plan. I usually, and then also you can have either a land planning location or a planning area, or you can have both. I usually do both. I usually have a planning location section and a planning area, but it's totally up to you. But the planning location refers to a specific geographic area for the purpose of land acquisition. So in your plan, you can have it depicted as a map. It doesn't have to be. It's up to you. And it can just be a general area, but you do need to have a narrative in that section, even if you have a map that describes the location. So this is an example. I just want to be clear. I haven't worked with the Mescalero Apache tribe. I just use them because as an example, because it's kind of in the area where I'm located, but they are not a tribe that I worked with. But this is just example text. If you were to include a planning location section in your plan. So here we have the planning location is the Mescalero Apache Reservation in Mescalero, New Mexico. The Mescalero Apache Reservation is in south central New Mexico and is home to the Mescalero Apache tribe. The reservation is almost entirely in Otero County. A small portion of the reservation is in Lincoln County. Mescalero is approximately 26 miles south of Ruidoso, 35 miles north of Cloudcroft, 21 miles east of Tularosa, and 87 miles west of Roswell. The nearest major cities are Albuquerque, 213 miles to the northwest, and El Paso, Texas, 119 miles to the southwest. Indigenous peoples have inhabited the planning location since time immemorial. So it's, dry, it's straight to the point, but it helps you to kind of know the general area where this is, or the general planning location. And again, you can choose to have just that, or have this and a planning area. So this planning area refers to the general or actual focus area for the purpose of land acquisition. So using the Mescalero Apache tribe again as an example, we could say for our planning area section of the plan, we could say the planning area includes parcels of unincorporated Lincoln County along Highway 70, south of Ruidoso, in the village of Ruidoso city limits, and other contiguous and non-contiguous lands desirable for acquisition. So that statement focuses your area of interest for land acquisition, but it's broad enough and flexible enough that you can grow, right? Like it can change with administration. So maybe one administration's like, yes, we're focused on all these parcels that are along I-70 or Highway 70, but we're going to put this other statement in there, this other contiguous and non-contiguous lands desirable for future acquisition. So then when a new administration comes in, they may say, yes, we're still focused on Highway 70, but focusing on, the southeast section of wherever is desirable for us. It helps meet our goals. So, making these plans where they can grow with you and that they're not just thrown out when a new administration comes in. But again, these need to be made to suit and to fit your needs. These need to be tailored for your purposes. So goals, this section should be included in any land acquisition plan. I do want to point out the difference between land acquisition planning goals and land acquisition goals or principles. So land acquisition planning goals refers to those goals that will guide the actual planning process, and those will be incorporated or should be incorporated into a work plan that you prepare in advance of planning. It's your plan for your plan, essentially. And I'll discuss the work plan later in the session. And then the goals that actually would be incorporated into your plan include land acquisition goals or principles. I've called them both depending on the plan. But these refer to goals or principles in which the completed land acquisition plan aims to achieve. So I think I have some examples here. Yeah, so examples of land acquisition planning goals, remember your planning to plan, your work plan goals might be, evaluate and establish processes for purchasing land and accepting donated lands. Developing policies and procedures to expedite acquisition and create standardized processes for performing due diligence. Carrying out a planning process that complements other departmental efforts and advances tribal economic goals. So again, those are kind of basically, what I kind of open open this session with, right? Benefits and goals of the planning process. It's just that, you know, and you include that in your work plan. That's what's guiding your process, your overall planning process. Now, an example of land acquisition goals or principles that you may want to incorporate into your actual planning document would be to support initiatives that meet land to trust requirements. So we're only going to look at land that we can take into trust, or lands that support a diversified portfolio, which is probably also something that you're looking at, or land acquisition. We're gonna focus on lands that fill market gaps, that help us to be more competitive. We want to consider workforce pipelines. You know, we don't want to acquire any lands if we don't have the workforce capable of supporting the businesses or the development that would occur, whether it's natural resource management and ag management, if you're doing it for energy, or you're doing it for other commercial development, you know, or it's like, you know, we need to be working with our employment and training folks to make sure that we have a pipeline of people that are ready to work whenever everything kind of comes together at the same time, right? Whenever you have acquired those lands and build them out or manage them to achieve your purpose. Other land acquisition principles or goals may be to emphasize environmental protection, you know, wetlands protection or other species protection, and then enhancing access to your reservation and increasing contiguity. Those could be they're examples of goals or principles that would again be incorporated into your plan. So when you're discussing or considering land acquisition, you have to obviously consider all of these overlapping jurisdictional authorities, right? That range from tribal government, state government, regional and special districts, like, you know, any sort of planning district, transportation district, port authority, those are considered regional and special districts, even a utility district, library district, and then federal government and local government. So you have like all of these overlapping authorities that you have to consider. You know, oftentimes with land acquisition, even if you're just focusing on, you know, lands within your area, your immediate area, you know, you could be talking about lands that are inside and outside the reservation, that are in multiple counties, multiple towns, you know, and all within, you know, a 30-mile radius. So it gets really complicated when you're talking about acquiring and evaluating these lands. You have to look at all of these different different authorities to really know what you're working with. So with tribal government, the first thing, you know, you're going to want to be clear on and aware of and be kind of evaluating all of the plans, policies, and documents that affect, you know, tribal council, the tribal police and tribal court system, tribal housing authority, tribal utility authority, you know, the economic development board. These are entities that could or may, you know, either whether or not they're directly involved with, you know, this planning process, they will at some point have some overlap, right? So you want to make sure to know, kind of be clear on what are they doing, what's their goals, what are their bylaws, you know, what is going on, just to be really clear of that, to make sure that your process doesn't conflict with that in any way, and that that in the future there's opportunities to maximize you know, investments and opportunities by working together. So for federal, you know, overlapping jurisdiction entities that you may want to look at, and I would recommend obviously the Department of Interior for clear reasons, Department of Agriculture, Department of Transportation, Department of Homeland Security a lot of times has some sort of jurisdictional authority within that area. Department of the Army, so your Army Corps of Engineers for wetland protection, and then U.S. Forest Service a lot of times, depending on the location of the lands, and then the Environmental Protection Agency. So these entities are going to have some authority over lands within the areas that you are looking to acquire. So you need to be very familiar with them, be familiar with any of the plans that they have under their agencies and departments that affect those lands. You know, just really study and research and you know, get to know the lands really well that you're looking at, and who has authority over what, and what are their plans for them. So state and local entities to consider is, you know, your state Department of Commerce. A lot of times they're going to be the ones that are managing growth. So if you have, and most states do have some sort of growth management act, that typically comes out of either the Department of Commerce or your Department of Natural Resources. Your Department of Transportation is really important for you know, clear reasons. These are lands that are going to be traversed by state and federal highways, right? So you want to know like exactly what is planned for those roads, what kind of money is going into them. You want to know everything about what has been done, what's being planned, what's being done right now, and what's going to be done in the future. So you need to, you know, visit the state's Department of Transportation website. You know, just again, really, you're like a detective. You're trying to figure it all out. What is going on? And then the Department of Natural Resources too at the state level. Counties, you're gonna, who has jurisdiction? You know, the county council, their board of directors, the sheriff's office, emergency medical services, district court, the prosecuting attorney. You know, these are all entities that have overlapping authorities. Likewise with the city council, city police, municipal court. So be familiar with the regulations, be familiar with what's going on, and just know the what's what, and include that in your plan. Like, you need to clearly state it, who has overlapping jurisdictional authorities, and like clearly state all of this in your document. Regional and local districts. So again, so now you're overlapping even more, right? So you have tribal, you know, federal, you know, state, county level, and then local level. And then you have like these regional authorities, which include a port authority, which is essentially like, you know, transportation authorities. Your council of governments. This is, you know, every area has this council of governments. It's like a regional planning district. So be familiar with their goals, be familiar with their plans. You know, what are they doing? What are their needs? I think if you understand, you know, what needs they've identified or what issues they've identified, it's an opportunity for you. So being, but it could also be, you know, an issue for you too. So you need to really be clear on all of these different overlapping jurisdictions and just kind of what's going on. Other special districts or quasi-municipal corporations are called, or can be referred to, include, you know, fire protection districts, housing districts, irrigation districts. Parks and Recreation typically will always have their own district within a town, you know, because that's how they get money, right? And I think tribes should really consider this more than they do for making money. But these special districts, you know, that's a funding source that goes to that Parks and Rec, right? For them to be able to provide trails, and that actually, trails is really important. That comes under that Parks and Rec, because these regional trail systems will impact lands. So if you need to be clear on what entities have planned for these regional trail systems, and do they traverse the lands you're interested in? And it could be an opportunity, right? It could be a way that you could actually work with the county or work with the city, whoever has that trail system planned, and, you know, work together to improve that trail system, and then make, really at the end of the day, make development review process go a lot smoother. If the land hasn't been brought into, oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. So if that land hasn't been brought into trust yet, you know, that might be something that you can you guys hear me still?
Yeah, we can hear you. You're good. I'm gonna
Okay.
mute. Don't worry.
Okay, good. No, I just want to make sure. But that really could be an opportunity to work together, and it would help to get development approved because you're working together, right? They need you for a reason. And then entertainment convention districts, all of those districts, again, just really need to be aware of them, aware of their authority, what are their goals, what is going on. So just a lot of research it's going to take, and include all of that research in your planning record, and include what's applicable in the plan itself. So yeah, and then look at all of those tribal and non-tribal plans. So we're talking about comprehensive land use plans, like all of the plans. See what the goals and the policies are in those different plans for all those different jurisdictions. So your county, will have a comprehensive plan. The cities within that area are going to have a comprehensive land use plan, and the tribe likely does have a land use plan or comprehensive plan. Really study all of those goals, study all of those policies, see where they complement, where they're inconsistent, just so you kind of have an idea and a feel for this area of the lands that you're interested in. Again, it's like you're a detective kind of trying to figure it out. So on reservations, plans and policies that you're going to want to consider, and this is regardless if your planning area includes on reservation lands or not. It's going to be important for you to be very clear on your tribal constitution, your tribal law and order code, tribal land use plan, tribal community plan, economic development plans, and then any bylaws that are applicable. Just be familiar with those and understand how your land acquisition plan and goals advance those laws and policies, and also adhere to and fit in with those. Off-reservation plans and policies that you're going to want to research and find and consider for your planning area and location are those that all of those that include these on-reservation plans that I just mentioned, but also any that mention or get into growth management laws, urban growth areas, or extraterritorial plans. They might be called annexation plans. When I was a city planner, ours were called a 3-mile plan, and that was by the state of Colorado. It required municipalities to have a 3-mile plan for an extraterritorial plan that identified lands within 3 miles of their boundaries for what was desirable for annexation. And I think annexation could be a whole separate topic and should be a whole separate topic on its own, because it is impactful to tribes. And understanding that process is really important, because you need to be strategic when other entities are trying to annex land that was traditionally yours and lands that you have sites on for reacquiring in the future. You need to know when those lands are being proposed for annexation. But anyway, but be familiar with those annexation plans. You need to be familiar with all the local, municipal, and county level land use laws and comprehensive land use policies. Study those, know them very, very well, and know where the needs are. Understand, where the gaps are. What is the location, the jurisdictions are suffering from? Do they need shovel-ready sites? Do they need daycare facilities? Identify, because again, this is kind of a way for identifying potential opportunities too in the future. The comprehensive economic development strategy plans. Lots of tribes have those, but also cities have those. So be clear on those. community plans, trails, and green space plans. And I can't emphasize that enough because it is an area of opportunity, these trails and green space. And also you want to know, like if you're looking at acquiring, you know, whatever parcels and 3 trail systems happen to like converge right there in the future, like there's a planned trail system for 3 regional trails to converge right on the parcels that you're looking for, that may or may not be something you want, but you want to know ahead of time because these trails plans are planned 20, 30, 40 years in advance, right? So you need to know kind of what's coming down the line for those properties or those parcels. So research those. Transportation plans, I'm going to be very clear on those. And then airport master plans, if you're within the vicinity of an airport, or if the lands that you want to acquire are within a vicinity of an airport, you want to be very familiar with the airport master plan. You want to be very familiar with the laws and policies around that within that area, and be familiar with the overlay zones that come with airports, what you can and can't do in those zones. And, you know, even if those lands are brought into trust, there's still going to be issues because you have FAA, right? So again, that's the federal level, the federal layer that you need to be, and I didn't include FAA on that, but that would be someone that, you know, entity that you need to be familiar with and be up on the rules of, you know, that impact those lands. So another aspect of your plan will be ownership patterns. This will be should be, I would recommend having it as a whole section, right? Ownership patterns refers to land tenure. You know, are these fee lands? Are they trust lands? Are they U.S. Forest Service lands? You know, are they county conservation lands? Like, what are they? And there's going to be a lot, right? Include that, be very clear in your document. So yeah, so these will consider, you know, those overlapping legal interests to both your natural and your physical properties in that planning area. So it'll include the jurisdictional authority, but also easements, rights of way, possessory and beneficial ownership interest in land. So I like if you're in an area with oil and gas, you know, you have ownership over different layers of the subsurface, you're going to want to know who owns you know, what's the ownership rights of all of those different layers of land, right? Because that can impact your use for those lands in the future. You need to be very clear on that. And if they're worth acquiring or not. So for the plan writing tip, again, be clear on all of these overlay zones impacting full or in part the planning area. So, you know, examples, I already mentioned the airport overlay zone, but another example of overlay zones include wetland protection zones, trails and open space. A lot of times those will have an overlay zone, but not always. So if it doesn't have an overlay zone, don't let that fool you. There's still likely a regional trails plan somewhere in that area. Highway corridor plans or overlay zones, flood protection overlay zones, etc., that influence development. So, you know, be really clear on those. And a lot of times you're going to have, you know, a county will have overlay zones, and the nearby city will have their own overlay zones, and then they're going to have, you know, their annexation plans that then like overlay another area. So you're going to find that you have like all these layers of authorities and all these layers of zones, and then, you know, who at the end of the day, whose jurisdiction is it really, because it's like all layered. So you have to like kind of figure all of that out, because at the end of the day, that all affects the land value, how it can be used, and you know, potential uses depending on what your goals for that particular, you know, those particular properties are. So growth management laws, these are something that if you're looking at doing land acquisition plans, you should be familiar with them. Again, these are state level plans. In the United States, we have, land development and land laws are primarily an issue of the state, right? And then typically the state will, delegate that authority to some extent to the local level, right? So growth management laws, they govern how fast a community can grow and what services are available to support them. So a lot of times most states will require municipalities and counties, municipalities to have annexation plans as they grow, right? They need to be able to show that they have the services to support this extra development. The county's role in that is to kind of facilitate or manage that process and to try to meet everybody's needs, which isn't going to happen, right? Because some areas are like, we want to develop, and other areas are like, we don't want to develop. We want to conserve our lands, and we want it to stay pristine, and we don't want any development. So at the same time, we understand that population's growing, economic needs are changing, cultural needs are changing. Like, you have all of these things going on. So growth management laws are one way to try to manage that on the front end. So you need to be very familiar with those. And now these would be, if you're just talking, so I need to back up. If you're just talking land acquisition for on reservation, within your reservation, this isn't going to apply. But if you're talking about land acquisition for both, outside of your reservation, for off reservation lands, this is, you want to be familiar with this. So these are, again, they are meant to help protect the environment, ensure this sustainable economic development, and improve quality of life. So again, every state's different because it is really a matter of the state. So you're just going to have to learn those for your particular state, and then you'll drill down once you figure it out at the state level, drill down to the county level, and then the local level. And like I said, sometimes they call it extraterritorial planning. The 3 mile plan. It's a extraterritorial plan. Sometimes they're just called annexation plans, and that's what they're called. So it just is kind of different for every state and location. So whether your plan is for just on reservation lands or on reservation and off reservation land acquisition, being really familiar with your land patterns within your reservation is really important. So considering the location of both on reservation and off reservation tribal owned lands and associated land ownership and development status. So if you're a tribe that has, you have your primary reservation and you have several areas of fee and trust lands that are kind of like scattered outside the exterior boundary of the reservation, you need to study those parcels, be really clear on, where they're located, why they were purchased by the tribe, what's the goal, are they in trust or are they fee, what's the end goal of these, because those might be areas where you want to cluster around, right, for contiguity and to expand that authority over those areas in the future. So you just need to really, kind of study the history on those parcels and understand, kind of the why behind all of it. Considering the Aboriginal lands and applicable and usual custom grounds and stations reserved through treaty rights. So, for any lands that you're looking at being reacquiring or acquiring through land acquisition, being familiar with those treaties and that language, if there is an applicable treaty over those areas, will be important, just to inform your planning process, and then also include that in your plan to the extent that you want to, and then it makes sense. And I think in all instances it would make sense. I can't think of a situation where it wouldn't make sense to include that for tribes. So considering tribal land use, development, zoning designations, and associated codes and authorities. So also considering, you know, if you do have a land use code and you do have a land use plan, trying, and it's not always going to be clear. You know, sometimes it'll be clear, but sometimes it's not. So trying to figure out, you know, if we acquire lands, will our on-reservation land use plan apply to off-reservation lands? Does it expressly say that? Is it implied? You know, how are we going to manage like these lands once acquired? So like kind of thinking about that on the front end is going to be really important, and seeing how your different plans are going to apply or not apply to land acquisition, because you'll need to be, you know, updating and considering that in the future, so you can make sure that at the end of the day, your land acquisition plan helps to, you know, streamline everything and make things easier, not that they conflict. So try to identify all of the issues on the front end. Also consider applicable memorandums of agreement. You know, a lot of times tribes will have memorandums of agreement with neighboring jurisdictions for various things, right? So look at those and be familiar with them, even the ones that have been in place that are not being, you know, followed, especially those, be familiar with them. But just, you know, try to figure out everything you can about, you know, all of these lands. So county patterns that you're going to want to consider and research, document, and include in your plan include these, you know, obviously the area, the population within the area, and the shifts in the expected population changes, major corridors and roadways, that land tenure, again, land use categories, you know, are these croplands, forest lands, urban lands, what are they? And then their land use designations, to the extent they have formal designations. You know, if they're just a rural ag lands, they probably don't have, you know, land use designations. But if they're within a more urbanized area, you know, and not like urban, like, you know, city, but even sparsely, you know, small area will likely have some of these designations anyway, like residential, commercial, public, and institutional. So being familiar with those designations. And then also just to point out, I'll have a webinar on land use evaluation in a couple of weeks. And a lot of that language, I'll be covering a lot of this in that. So you might be interested in that, or in the handouts that come with that. There's several handouts that come with that just are primarily definitions, but they might be handy for you if you're interested. So in terms of land use challenges, you need to be familiar with these, and these will be outlined in county comprehensive land use plans. They'll be outlined in city, you know, land use plans. Economic development plans are going to be outlined somewhere. So be very familiar with the land use challenges. These include, you know, lack of shovel-ready sites, limited developable lands remaining due to wetlands or due to, you know, whatever reason, trail and open space connectivity, congestion along major corridors. Like, these are all issues, number one, that you're going to need to know about if you're, you know, acquiring the lands within the area, and make sure that you're okay with that. But also, they're areas of opportunity. You know, if there's a lack of shovel-ready lands within the area, that you know, there's companies that want to you know, have a site to go to for their enterprise, but there's a lack of those sites there. That's a perfect opportunity for a tribe, you know, to make some pretty significant money and make like generational change for their community. You know, so it's a huge opportunity. So look at that. Look at those issues in the area, because those can very well be an opportunity for you. Let's see. So the same with the local patterns. Again, you know, the population, the land area, how many acres are we talking about within the, if your land is within next to or within a neighboring city, you want to know, how much land do they have? Are they going to be looking to expand? Are they going to be looking to annex land? It's important for you to understand the context in which you're working. What major roadways and corridors are going through the local, the city versus the county. Considering their comprehensive neighborhood, So consider their comprehensive plans, neighborhood plans, sub-area plans, and again, these annexation plans. So all of these are going to have separate plans, and you're going to want to, research those, find those, figure out, again, what's going on in the area. And then the land use challenges that the local jurisdiction is experiencing, so local level, which are likely going to mirror the issues that are happening at the county level. And again, you're kind of identifying this and documenting it. And then to the extent that there's any conflict, then you can kind of like figure that out. But typically they're going to be in line, like if the county is saying we're experiencing issues with lack of shovel ready sites, there's a high likelihood that that's happening within the actual, city. So again, making that an opportunity for you, again, if this is for economic development purposes. But it could also be like, we want to advance clean energy goals, and we don't have, any space for, or any lands within our jurisdiction that can be used for agrivoltaics or, whatever. Like that's another, opportunity or thing to look at. So population characteristics, you'll want to include this for all of the jurisdictions that the lands that you're interested in fall under. So if you're looking, just at the county level, if your lands are only within the county and not within a city's jurisdiction, you can evaluate, the U.S. Census or the plans that affect that county. But look for population, demographics information, educational attainment, home ownership rates, gross median rents in the area, and then also social goals, challenges, needs, and priorities. Again, if you're acquiring lands for economic development, for housing, for industry, these are going to be important characteristics to know. You're going to want to know, is this population in this area primarily, college kids? Is it primarily families with 2.5 kids in a 2-car, like who's there and who's going to be there? What does your population look like? You need to know the area and kind of have an idea of what the history has been for that area. So these characteristics should be in your plan. They should be communicated both in graphic and text form. I don't have to tell you, a lot of people don't read plans, right? I think everyone's different in how they take in information. So making sure that you can communicate your plan to all people that will be using that plan, and making sure that to do that, achieve that, is to graphically represent what your narrative is saying. So economic characteristics you're going to want to evaluate include the median household income, employment rate, industry, who's the largest employers in the area, what's the proximity to economic nodes. So for the lands that you're interested in, where are the nearest economic nodes, and what do those look like, and what are the goals, what are the challenges for those areas. Again, this should be displayed in graphic and narrative format. So for your priority areas, you will want to be, provide a really clear outline in your plan of those areas. So, kind of like I did in the beginning of this presentation, where I provided you with that example of the parcels along Highway 70, right? So being clear in that. Sorry, I have a runny nose. Be clear in that in your plan, but drill down. So like if those parcels are zone general business or light commercial or residential, be clear on that in your plan, and in your plan explain that. Like, what does that mean? What is industrial zoning district mean? What is allowable? What's not allowable? Include land qualities and characteristics, topography, terrain, utilities. So like I just did a land acquisition plan, and part of that, I was looking at the infrastructure in the area and researching, trying to find the different infrastructure plans that covered that area. And in the plan that I did for the areas that they were interested in acquiring, I went in depth. I'm like, there's broadband or there's fiber, on the east side of this property. There's utilities on the south side. Like, you need to be very specific on what's there and what isn't there, to the extent that information is available. You want to communicate market opportunities. So again, whether or not this land acquisition plan has a land use component, which I highly recommend. I don't think it's a good idea to do a land acquisition plan that doesn't have a land use component, because, then you're just like, okay, great, we have this land, now what? So you need to have a land use, a component of that. Even if it's just for cultural purposes, or you're reacquiring traditional lands that you're going to use for conservation, cool. It just needs to say it, right? It needs to be clear. You need to have in the narrative of your plan, you need to be clear on what those lands will be used for. So having that land use component to your land acquisition plan. But I think even if you don't have a land use component, you should communicate to some extent these issues, like with if it is for economic development, communicate market opportunities and market insights that would be used for supporting evidence to acquire those lands. Incorporate case studies. I like incorporating case studies into plans. I think it's a really valuable tool. I think it helps, the reader to visualize and to understand what's going on, but also to be able to connect the dots, right? And a lot of times these plans are written for leadership and leadership changes and staffing changes. So if you have kind of a case study and a vision, or an example built into your plan, people can connect more easily to that, right? And they're able to kind of be part of it. Then even if they weren't part of the planning process, they understand it more easily, and they're going to support it more, I think, or at least in my experience. So let's see, plan rating tip: ensure market opportunities demonstrate consistency with land acquisition and principles, and anticipate current and projected growth trends. So yes, so for your economic development kind of focused land acquisition plans, you definitely want to consider those trends with the market opportunity. Be prepared and kind of knowing that economies change, markets shift, but still have a good kind of idea of what is going on and what the trajectory is for that area. So you may or may not want to have a section in your plan that is titled strategic framework, but even if you don't, you should have a section in there somewhere that outlines the delegated authorities and who's kind of responsible for what or who's doing what. So if you have a section that's called strategic framework, this section would outline these delegated roles and responsibilities and the methodologies for determining the suitability for land acquisition. And it's really going to introduce that implementation process generally. So, you know, in the earlier parts of your plan, you're going to note, you know, this is my planning kind of location. This is the planning area. This is the area that we're focused on. You know, you're going to outline who is responsible, or, you know, what the overlapping authorities are, what plans and policies and laws are applicable to that area. So you kind of have it all laid out. Well, now you need the implementation part, right? You need to know who's responsible for what and how are we going to go about acquiring these lands and deciding if they're even, you know, just because they're in your planning area doesn't mean that they're going to fit your needs. So you need to have kind of a process for that, right? And a strategic framework is a good way to do that. For a plan rating tip, you know, use these flow charts to illustrate organizational hierarchy and delegated authorities. Again, you know, for the visual folks, to be able to kind of flip through a plan and see, oh yeah, you know, Department of Commerce or the land department's responsible for this, and then they report to the planning committee, or, you know, whatever it is, but at least it outlines it. In this, don't refer to individuals, you know, refer to their positions, titles, and roles. People come and go. You need to be able to assign these duties, these delegated responsibilities to that role, not to that person. I think that's really important. So delegated roles and responsibilities. So again, referring to the department and or the positions with the delegated authority and the duty to lead the land acquisition initiatives on behalf of your organization, whether it's, you know, the tribe, housing authority, whoever's like initiating this process. And I think it is important to remember that this is it's an authority and it's a duty, right? This person's taking on a big responsibility and it needs to be treated as such. This plan will only, you know, the plan that you create should only authorize the actions that are consistent with applicable laws. So that's, again, why you want to be really clear on your own laws and the laws, you know, around you, to make sure that there's no conflicting, you know, issues with the plan. And that, you know, you're only allowed, unless there's a legislative change through the tribal government, you know, you can't delegate powers that haven't already been delegated, right? You don't have that authority. So you have to work within your sandbox, and to make it as efficient as possible. Let's see. So, and then individuals entrusted to implement this process shall be held to a high standard and expected to exercise professional judgment in the best interest of the organization. And I think this is, you know, really clear and or really important to point out. I mean, it's obvious, but it's important to point out. There, you know, there could be a conflict. There could be a conflict of interest. So you need to be able to make sure to mitigate that on the front end and don't put anyone in a bad position and don't let anyone take advantage of you, right? So that's why you need to have strong processes and procedures in place when it comes to identifying and leading that process for land acquisition. Individuals should always be required to disclose conflicts of interest. So, you know, if someone's cousin owns a piece of property that is desirable for land acquisition, they need to, you know, disclose that information ahead of time. Like, you know, I know this person, they own this land, you know, whatever. It just needs to be kind of known to mitigate any issues with that. Plan rating tips: study organizational bylaws, tribal laws, plans and prepare interim reports for applicable parties when determining who will lead the pre-purchase due diligence and coordination for land acquisition initiatives. And I think I would recommend this, and this, what I've done is to, incorporate that into your plan, where staffing is responsible for creating kind of staffing reports to inform the planning committee or whoever they're reporting to, inform them of the land, how it fits with the land acquisition plan, how it fits with other tribal plans, really kind of like lays out ownership and all of this stuff, right? And if there is a conflict of interest, that it lays that out clearly. So, incorporating those into your plan. Evaluation and ranking. This is a mechanism designed to assist whoever's responsible for making those final decisions or making recommendations to council to judge the initial merit of these land acquisition initiatives. It can be determined, or these can be designed to determine the extent of the authority needed to negotiate and make an offer on a specific property. So, maybe you want to allow your land department authority to make an initial offer on lands that are contiguous to, your reservation or another area that you've identified. Having certain levels of what's okay and what's not okay. Have that built into your plan, have it very, very clear so you don't have to guess. Just want to make it really easy. I do think plans should be designed to age well. This plan writing tip says, depending on the overall land acquisition plans, the plan should be written to age well. And I think that's important. I've seen a lot of plans that they just don't age well, right? Like if you're noting specific parcels, that's probably not going to age well, because once those lands are acquired, then what? Now you need a new land acquisition plan, right? If plans change or things shift, now all of a sudden something in due diligence was identified wrong with those parcels that were first desirable for acquisition, but now are no longer desirable for acquisition. Again, now what? Now you need a new plan. So try to kind of consider all of this on the front end when you're developing these plans. Be strategic in the plan making process, so these plans do age well and they can grow with you. One way to do that, or one way to achieve that, is by doing evaluation tiers, so to speak. So examples of evaluation tiers include primary evaluation and ranking tiers, general value indicators, site-specific indicators, viability indicators, and special criteria indicators. So I'm going to just kind of go through those. Primary evaluation criteria ranking tier. This will focus on the property's physical attributes under consideration. So, contiguity. Is this land contiguous or with aggregation or assembly, land assembly? Will it have contiguity to the reservation? Current zoning. What's the access? Those are kind of attributes that you can look at for your evaluation criteria. If you can't access the site and it doesn't give us contiguity to the reservation, then it's not a level tier 1 acquisition. It's a tier 3, but if it gives us access and contiguity, then that's a tier 1 acquisition, and that's your nod to proceed, type of thing. You're putting out, I guess, just parameters. General valuation indicators include value indicators important for the organization. So these could be highest and best use, and these should overlap and complement your goals or your principles. But highest and best use, diversity and balance of liquidity. So you know, do you want all of your lands to be, you know, in trust, or do you want to have kind of this balance where you have some of them that are in fee? So if you need to leverage or you need to get rid of something for whatever, you know, something happens, you can. So if that's part of your land goals or your principles, then will that acquisition help advance that? And if it does, great. If it doesn't, then, you know, you need to reevaluate, but that can be part of your evaluation criteria. Does the property have utilities and infrastructure? Does it have potential for open space and connectivity and conservation? You know, these can be ranking and evaluation indicators or requirements. Like if it doesn't have those, you know, and you'll have these like kind of in a check sheet. I'll talk about that in a minute. But, you know, if you can't like check those boxes, then it doesn't meet your needs, even if it's in your planning area. Specific site indicators include, you know, the evaluation of the qualities necessary to accommodate the use by right uses on that based on the physical characteristics of the land. So use by right means the zoning designation, right? So if you're in a residential area zoned residential, or if you're in area zoned industrial, if you're in area zoned agriculture, does that particular parcel that you're looking at acquiring, does it have the physical qualities necessary to meet the uses that are of use by right uses? So if it's a property zoned residential, does it have proper, you know, access? Is it located to economic zones or economic nodes? Is it located, you know, near work and school and healthcare centers? Because those are going to make those lands more desirable, right, for residential uses. If it's an industrial, if it's zoned industrial, does it have proper ingress and egress to major transportation routes? You know, so really looking at the site specific qualities of that property. Just because it's, you know, zoned something doesn't mean that that piece of property is actually desirable for that use. You know, and likewise, if you're wanting to acquire the land for agricultural purposes or cultural purposes, you know, does it have the land qualities needed to meet your goal, whatever those goals are? You just need to make sure that it does and incorporate that as part of your like criteria. Viability indicators refer to these indicators that are used to gauge the feasibility of land acquisition by evaluating factors such as the willingness of landowners to negotiate, whether an initiative has the support needed to help move the land acquisition and associated development forward, and whether the financial capital required to achieve land use goals is available, among other things. But so, you know, if there's lands that you're interested in and the landowners aren't willing to negotiate, or their representatives aren't willing to negotiate, you know, it may just not be viable right now and it's not worth your time. You know, likewise, if you don't have the financial capital, maybe you have the financial capital to acquire them, but do you have the financial capital to pay the taxes, to do all you need to do until those lands are brought into trust? You know, that's the indicator that you need to look at. That's the viability indicator, because you don't want this to end up being a liability, right? Yeah, I think. I was just trying to think of another viability, but I think that being really clear on that capital kind of component is important. It's hard, right? We don't want to think about that, but we want to know that we have the means necessary to take care of those lands. And I think, and that's where those passive income properties come valuable, because at least if you can make enough income on them to offset, you know, in the time being, offset taxes or whatever till those lands are brought into trust, or until you use them for a more intense development, then, you know, it'll help kind of offset, and your viability will be better. But those are things that you need to think about, and if you incorporate them as criteria into your plan, then you will think about them, or whoever comes behind you will think about those. So these special criteria, right, when it's called special criteria, they're like these go or no go indicators that indicate if a property is eligible for acquisition or should be put on hold. So you can have like, it can hit all of your criteria, right? You can be like, oh, this is a tier 1, like, you know, it meets all of our needs, it meets our goals. But if there's, for whatever reason, something that makes that land a no-go, you need to know that, you know, like if there's a certain easement or, you know, whatever comes up in the due diligence process, then, you know, that would be your no-go. Like that just has to go. We can't move forward with it until, for whatever reason, circumstances changes, or you can show otherwise that it's actually desirable and that it's going to be beneficial for the organization to acquire that piece of property. So for the plan writing tip, include evaluation indicators and criteria on worksheets in the body of your plan and or appendices. I do both. I include them in the body, like, you know, this is the indicators, this is kind of the outline of your worksheet, and then I include a worksheets in the appendices too, for staff, right, to like check off everything. And then you can incorporate, staff should be incorporating those worksheets into their staffing reports for the land commission or whoever, you know. So it's kind of, you're creating a plan that is used you know, by all levels of decision makers, but to really also help staffing into meeting the tribal council's goals, or whoever, you know, whether it's a housing authority or whoever is running the initiative. But by incorporating these worksheets, you're helping yourself, if you're staff developing it, or if you're leadership having this plan developed, you're helping your personnel to be able to meet your goals by doing that. For implementation, this refers to this establishment of this process for leading, coordinating both the off-market and on-market and land donation acquisitions. So this is the, you know, obviously for the entity that's undertaking the planning process, but it should be, you know, really specific. So like, if your land acquisition plan includes both on reservation or on market, like for sale, like listed for sale properties, off market properties where you're like, man, we want that parcel for whatever reason. And you go to the homeowner, or you hire a representative to go to the homeowner to discuss negotiations for that piece of property. Especially when you're like, you know, assembling land, right? You're being strategic. You're going to have to go to people that don't have their property up for sale. And land donations, you need to have your plan that is very specific to these areas, because they're all different. And, you know, your requirements for all are going to be different. So your plan needs to be clear in that. But all of these 3 things can be included in one plan. It's just how you organize the plan, if that makes sense. So in terms of like your implementation process, that will, and this should be outlined in your plan in like the implementation section. You should have like a step-by-step process. And this would be, in general, kind of what your process would be. Number 1, identifying the land parcel. 2, conducting that initial research and performing an existing conditions assessment, researching document title and ownership, including liens, encumbrances, sales history, zoning, tax information, and current on-site and adjacent uses. You need to be like really clear on all of that. And everything that we just went through over the last hour will help you to be able to do this, right? Conducting on-site visits to the extent that you can, and then determining whether this acquisition is consistent with your land acquisition goals or principles. You know, if the land parcel or area is not consistent with your land acquisition principles, that's a no-go, right? Like it needs to be consistent with the overall direction, your land acquisition direction. And then utilizing that, the next step would be utilizing your evaluation and ranking criteria to determine eligibility and or priority for acquisition. So again, like if you're using ranking tiers, is it a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 acquisition, and who has, you know, authority to deal with tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. So, you know, that would be your next step. And then finally determining that authority to kind of lead that process for making the initial offer, for going through negotiations, accepting, rejecting, and making counter offers, like, you know, outlining that in your plan. But those would be your kind of general primary steps. And then you got to pay for it, right? Who's gonna pay for it? So you need to have a component of your plan that really gets at this land acquisition fund. So this refers to a dedicated pool of money used to purchase the land to achieve your specific land acquisition goals. So for this, you're going to want to use like a flow chart to illustrate how this land fund is organized, who's, you know, responsible, like for what, like where is the money coming from, right? And what does that process look like? So you need to be able to explain that in the narrative, and then also in a graphic form. So to do this, and I don't know if I'm running, I'm like almost out of time. So for your planning process, you'll want to structure and schedule the planning process, collect and analyze your data, identify your issues, problems and gaps in information and concerns. You're going to want to design your evaluation framework and develop the plan, and then adopt, implement, and monitor that plan. You know, hopefully that plan will be written to age well, but you need to, you know, monitor that. So in the very front end, you know, this is your structuring and scheduling the planning process. This is your planning to plan. So as you're developing your land acquisition plan, before you start developing that, you need to prepare your work plan. And I kind of talked about this in the beginning of this session, but this will start usually as a directive, you know, from tribal council or a different authority on moving forward with this process. So your work plan will help to guide that overall process of what that's going to look like. If you're working with a consultant, you know, that'll kind of outline that relationship, and then, you know, who you and your consultant are going to reach out to, and like what data you're going to collect. Like it's going to lay all of that out. And I think, you know, I'm a very, I always develop a work plan in the beginning of my planning process, but this plan writing tip just really says, you know, to outline your approach, your timeline, and those expectations. And it can be a very formal or informal document, but you should have it. And this is like beyond scope of work, like it should be really detailed. It will identify, you know, the data that you're going to collect, like I said, the primary and the secondary, whether those are interviews, surveys, and then all of your census data for your social conditions and your economic conditions, and mapping. Identifying patterns, problems, and gaps. You're going to want to conduct, you know, the systematic topic research using all of the strategies that we've discussed, looking for all of the plans. You're going to be wanting to look for all the demographics, reports, you know, everything that you can find. Remember, you're a detective in this. So really do this through, you know, try to do it in a systematic way that you're logging everything. For land acquisition, I think what I found is, you know, Google Maps is like your best friend. You need to really know the area, and to do that, I think Google Maps is a great way to do that. You can see like spatially what is going on in that area. So spend a lot of time doing that and evaluating these properties from up high, from the high level. The next step, you're going to want to, design that framework and ranking criteria, go through those primary and general and specific site requirements, the viability indicators. And when you do this, you're going to have to run what I say here in the plan writing tip, run rigorous land acquisition tests against the evaluation framework. And this is the hardest part. Like, you develop this whole plan and you develop all the criteria, right? Like, this tier 1 property has to be contiguous to Highway 70 or, whatever it is, you're being specific. Now you have to run tests. Like, you just have to kind of go in blind, look on a map, go in blind. Okay, there's that parcel. Does that fit the, my criteria? And really check it to make sure that everything works right. And that's a good way it sounds crazy, but that's how if you just kind of randomly pick a parcel, and if it meets your criteria tests, then you're good. Otherwise, you need to rework that to make sure that everything is okay. And then, you develop your final plan, you compile all of your information, try to write it as clear as possible, and do a lot of revisions, using page numbers, graphics, tables, charts, have a really strong planning record. And then, be clear on, your audience for who you're writing it for. And whenever you develop that plan, you'll want to include those criteria indicator worksheets, flow charts, and checklists, and a personal affidavit. I think it's a good idea for conflict of interest for anyone that you're has this kind of delegated a higher role of authority in this process. Include an affidavit of a personal affidavit in your actual document where that person has to sign, yes, I do not have a conflict of interest, or this is a potential conflict of interest, and they have to disclose that. I think that puts more pressure on that individual or that department head, they see that they have a responsibility in this. So it just kind of adds that extra layer. So then your next step would be adopting the document by formal resolution or motion. I would recommend by resolution, doing a communication plan to monitor that. And then this final plan writing tip, and I think this is it, is incorporate confidentiality provisions and disclosures as applicable. You probably don't want everyone to know, what lands you're wanting to acquire, right? So kind of be prepared for that, incorporate that, and I guess anticipate that on the front end. If it needs to be a confidential document, make sure that that you're able to maintain that confidentiality. And then the final takeaways include land acquisition planning provides a strategic approach to acquiring and assembling land. Land acquisition planning will minimize ad hoc decision-making and streamline the overall acquisition process. The planning process and resulting plan should be customized to meet the tribe's unique goals. And this is true for any plan, but obviously, especially for land acquisition plans, they need to be tailored to you and to your area. Incorporate evaluation worksheets and staff checklists into the plan, and incorporate a planning element or a land use planning element to enhance the plan's effectiveness. And I kind of hit on that a little bit. And I think that is important to have some sort of land use aspect to your land acquisition plan. I went over a little bit, but I think that's it. If we have any questions. No, I can't see. Or did I lose you guys? Did everyone log off?
No, they're still all here.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, now I can see. Maybe. Oh, okay. Just no questions. Does anyone have any questions? The printout. You should be able to print them out. I think for Richard, And if not, I don't know if in OSDA they can resend them to you, or I can send them to you too.
Yeah, we can absolutely resend them if you're okay with them printing it. We just do it as like a safety measure, but we're more than happy to.
Yes. And thank you for saying that, because I know some of them, this one doesn't have any client specific information. So I would be fine with you for printing them out. Some of my presentations I use for like client examples, and I don't really because I don't want that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we'll go ahead and fix that so everyone can be able to print it out.
Okay.
I went ahead and launched the survey. If everyone could please just take their time to go ahead and fill that out. Amy does really appreciate it. She reads them. It just gives real insight of what you guys would like her to go into in the future webinars, or anything she could touch up on in the next one. Any questions about this one, she's more than happy to do that. It is anonymous also. And don't forget to register for our next webinar. It is Homelessness in Native American Communities. Our show times are 2 p.m. EST, 1 p.m. CST, 12 p.m. MST, 11 a.m. PST, and 10 a.m. Alaska time. And that is going to be January 16th. Friendly reminder, you can access this webinar recording as well as all of Amy's webinars on our YouTube channel. The link is also here. If you have any trouble, like any hard times finding a certain webinar, please email us and we'll be more than happy to help locate the webinar you're looking for. Don't forget to check out our upcoming events on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. You can also listen to our podcast, Opening a Native American Podcast, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Simplecast. I just want to thank everyone once again for joining us today, and a special thank you to Amy. We really appreciate you instructing today's webinar, and we can't wait to see you on the next one. I hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Thank you very much. Bye.